If the slaves in the South were treated so poorly, why did many fight for the Confederates during the Civil War? This is a slightly deceiving premise, as first of all, slaves only began to fight for the South in 1865, and as you might recall, that was literally the last year of the war. On March 13th, the Confederate armies faced much larger Union opposition, so in a desperate measure, the Confederates reluctantly approved the use of black troops. The idea was actually debated throughout the war, as one politician stated, "What did we go to war for, if not to protect our property?" And another one stated, "If slaves will make good soldiers, our whole theory of slavery is wrong." Even General Robert E. Lee stated, "We must decide whether slavery shall be extinguished by our enemies and the slaves be used against us, or use them ourselves." But before we get into black soldiers fighting for the Confederacy, we have to know what jobs slaves did to assist the war while not actively fighting in it as soldiers. As you can imagine, enslaved black men were used in much worse ways during the entire war because, they were slaves. Many slaves simply carried out doing their normal tasks for the Southern states, which of course helped the war effort, working in farms, factories, plantations, and households. Many slaves went into the battlefield, with Confederate armies as servants, laborers, teamsters, hospital workers, and cooks, similarly to how the Romans would take legionary slaves. Obviously, none of these men really actually volunteered to fight for the Confederacy. They merely were a cog in the Confederate military machine. These slaves were an integral part of the Confederate army encampment, washing clothes, cooking meals, driving wagons, unloading trains, building walls, bridges, trenches, and helping the wounded. There are very few instances of these servants occasionally participating in a battle, but their effect and motivation are still unclear. There were even instances of free black men volunteering for the Confederacy at the beginning of the war, mostly as laborers though. Their main motivation of doing so was simply the odds of being treated better by the Union or the Confederacy. So how many black Confederates actually fought for the Confederacy as soldiers, and did they really make a difference? Unfortunately for the Confederacy, their laws required masters to recognize the slaves' freedom before they could enlist. Obviously not many men wanted to get rid of the thing they were literally fighting for, so recruitment of black Confederate soldiers was extremely low, possibly less than a few hundred before we surrender Appomattox, as only 2 units were created, both in the Confederate capital of Richmond. These units, however, lacked uniforms or even rifles, and most likely saw no action, acting more like guards if anything. There are only 7 accounts from the Union eyewitness reports of black Confederates, with only 3 mentioning them firing at Union soldiers. 3 other reports mentioned them only as laborers, and the other one mentioned a few armed black Confederate soldiers captured with white Confederate soldiers. So while there probably were a few black soldiers fighting for the Confederacy, they were so rare that they practically affected nothing.